found out that we're one of only 3 long-term studies in North America for predators. So it's not common at all. And those are all those other studies are wolves. So you have Yellowstone and Isle Royal, and then you have here in Chicago with coyotes. So what I'll do is I'm going to share a little bit of this with you. It's a big project. I'm not going to touch on everything. I'm just going to pick up and choose a couple things. We have some new results that we just finished with a couple PhD students, so I want to touch on that. I'll go back in time and go back to something that we did earlier in the study that most of you probably aren't aware of. But I think it's worthwhile kind of going back to that. It was also a very influential part of the study, and then we'll talk about what we're doing right now. And feel free to interrupt me anytime. So especially if there's something that I say that you don't understand, stop me. So real quick, just so that we're all on the same page, I think we have some new faces here, so I want to make sure everyone understands kind of what a coyote is. This will be the really brief version. So coyotes are a member of the Canidae family. That's the dog family. So that includes wolves, coyotes, and a variety of different foxes. It also includes jackals over in the old world. And then there's another species as well, or at least it used to be a species. It's not anymore. We've moved it over into the other category. It's a relatively new animal, so just within the last, well, it's debatable, either 15,000 or 30,000 years ago. There's one little study out there that suggested maybe 100,000. That's that species right there. So dogs originally were Canis familiaris, but now we're putting them into Canis lupus, which is wolf. Genetically, they're so similar that we can't really call them different species. And so I want you to remember that a little bit later, because we're going to talk about some of our new research. And a lot of that sprung from dog research. So I'll blow this up. This is the Canidae family, and down at the bottom, I want you to look. There's a coyote and a wolf group. That's in the blue lines. I just want to point out that coyotes and dogs, again, are relatively recent. Again, genetically, dogs and wolves are essentially identical, but coyotes are out there just a little bit, some distance away from the wolves. And what that means is that coyotes have been a distinct animal for at least 1 million years. So they're not equal, even though they can interbreed with dogs and wolves. They've been their own animal for a very long time. And in fact, the wolves that we have in North America didn't occur for almost all of the evolution of coyotes. So we didn't have Canis lupus in North America until only about 100,000 years ago, which is no time at all. We had the dire wolf. That was what they co-evolved with, the biggest wolf in the world. So the coyotes are uniquely North American species, so they're not found in other continents, although I'm going to have to change that here pretty quick because their range extends all the way down into Central America, and just in the last 2 years they have crossed the Panama Canal. So they're about to, well, we're going to see. It's going to be another experiment. We're currently under an experiment right now. They were not found east of the Mississippi historically, but of course they're found all the way to the Atlantic coast and all the way up to the Arctic Circle. And in fact, another project that we have, or had through McGraw, was a project over in Nova Scotia and up an island, Cape Breton Island. And I won't talk about that tonight, but that's an area where, again, they're new. They've only been there since the 1980s. All right, so the thing about coyotes, I'm going to show you this video. This video is shot by Lauren, one of our techs, and it's an amazing video. And I just want to make the point that coyotes have been around for a long time. They have experienced tremendous persecution, not just for humans, but actually for most of their evolution. They're a medium-sized animal in North America prior to about 40,000 years ago. Again, for most of their evolutionary history, they were coexisting with a bunch of mega carnivores. So we had lions, we had cheetahs, we had leopards, we had huge cave bears, we had all of these, and of course the dire wolf, all these predators were coexisting with these coyotes. So coyotes were being hunted for a long time before humans even came to North America. And what all of that pressure created was this amazing animal. So you're going to watch this animal hunt. And this is primarily what coyotes do day in and day out, even our urban coyotes for the most part. And let's see this. Okay. So look at the snow, and you'll see that the snow is completely undisturbed. So this coyote is hunting, is listening, and is hearing something under the snow, and it catches a bull. So that's without seeing it, that's without smelling it, that's just using hearing. Their sense of smell is even better than their sense of hearing when they're using that. But that's how good they are at what they do. And they can mouse anywhere. So the coyote that was on the title slide, that coyote was named Yoder. I won't go into the full story about that coyote, but he had been raised by people, and somehow we ended up with him. And I remember walking him on a leash, and we walked him every day, and he would mouse right off of the bike trail, and he would catch rodents right off anywhere. So they're very good at what they do. So in the recent time, in the last 2 to 2.5 decades, coyotes have moved into cities. This is not common. They did not occur, at least to the same levels that they do now before. And in fact, most of the eastern cities, they didn't have any coyotes before. So this is a recent phenomenon, and this is a great example of how they are so successful, because we are their biggest predator. So they're the one game animal that has the least amount of protection. So you can hunt them year-round. That's true for virtually every state. You can trap them. You can fur trap them during a season, or you can trap them as a predator control or nuisance animal anytime. And in fact, most places a few decades ago would have bounties, and so they would actually pay you to even kill more coyotes. And all of that pressure just created more coyotes. And they responded by literally moving into our backyards. So they're basically, if they had a thumb, they would be thumbing their nose at you. And so this, I'm not going to show you a lot of graphs, but so this is the number of nuisance coyotes lethally removed from the Chicago area beginning around 1989. So all the way over in that left-hand side starts with 89 up to about 2007 or so. And you'll see that it's basically during the 1990s is when the number of coyotes grew exponentially. In fact, that's a 1,000-something% growth over a 10-year period. And it was that growth, it was that occurrence of coyotes coming out of nowhere, and this concern is what actually created the motivation behind the study. So Cook County Animal Control, in addition to a couple other agencies, asked us at McGraw to try and do a study to see what the heck is going on with these coyotes. Why are they showing up in areas that they've never been seen before, and what does that mean? So that's really the reason why we've been doing this study. So again, we started in 2000. That blue line is where we started. So you can see how it was increasing dramatically, and it was pretty scary at that time. No one knew exactly where this was going to go. And then you can see it's plateaued, since then, since we began. But anyway, so that's how we started. And now, this project has always been focused on the management side. So we're focused on risk and what kind of threats coyotes might pose or not pose for us. What are the best management strategies for living with coyotes? That we've also introduced other questions in terms of how they're functioning. And so these are all the different things that we're focusing on, such as the population dynamics and social systems, disease dynamics, how they're relating to other wildlife. I'm not going to go through all of these things. All of these are their own projects in and of themselves. I just want to point out that over the years, this project has grown to the point where it is the largest study that's been done for this species, and one way that we're able to do this is by collaborating with a large group of people. So in addition to, I get to stand here and talk about the work that a lot of other people are doing. But we collaborate with, right now, currently about 6 universities and other agencies on top of that, looking at these different elements. So I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm going to pick out a couple real quick, but first we'll go over just some of the baseline stuff. So how do we do this? We actually capture the coyotes using the same traps that fur trappers use, using the same strategies that they use, only instead of collecting them for their fur, we mark them and then we release them or we catch them. So we'll put ear tags in their ears that are numbered so that they're permanently marked, and then we'll put a radio collar on the adults so we can track them. The radio collars allow us to basically look into parts of their lives that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. So just a few pictures of doing our work. So it's Abby looking at teeth. Teeth are very important to coyotes because without them, they can't really get by. They can go without a leg. Some of them might even get by without 2 legs for a little while, but they can't get by without their teeth. So it's pretty important. That's an animal, it was Coyote 500, getting radio collared there. It was kind of a milestone animal. And then it's 881, and so that's an animal that you'll see in a video coming up here in just a little bit. And then we track them, so that's one of our collared animals out there doing its thing. So we use both what we call VHF, so we have to physically track them. So technicians are out day and night during the week, all weeks of the year, and we've been, again, doing that for 19 years. So we know a lot about the movement patterns of these animals. There's also mortality sensors on them, so when the animal dies, within a few hours, then we'll know that it's probably dead, and we'll go and collect the carcass so that we can actually take them in. That's another collaboration with the University of Illinois, and they'll do the full necropsy. So we know a lot about these animals. And then in addition to trapping the adults, every spring we go into the dens. So coyotes only have 1 litter a year, and it's only during the April-May period. And so we wait for our coyotes, our collared coyotes, to have their litters, and then we'll go into their den one time and we'll mark their young. So just a few pictures of the pups. They get a microchip, so the same microchips that you would put into your cat or your dog, so they're permanently marked. Each one of them has their own unique code. So then we can follow their family relationships over time. We'll collect a little bit of hair or a few drops of blood for genetic work. We're the first study. It's hard to believe this because coyotes have had a lot of research done on them in rural areas, but we're the first study that's actually looked at their genetic relationships and the actual genetic basis to their mating systems. And it's unique in the mammalian world. I'll talk about that in a second. So, for example, this looks like a pretty natural den that you might see in the woods somewhere here in Illinois. But if you turn the camera to the side, then you'll see that this litter is born right next to people. So that's the biggest challenge for these coyotes here. This is the only time, one of the misperceptions that people have about coyotes is that they use dens year-round, that the adults use dens. They don't use dens. Adults don't like to go into a hole in the ground. They don't like that. In fact, the male won't go in there. The female will only go in there long enough to get her pups to weaning age, and then they get them out. This is the most dangerous time, and it's also the period where you have probably the most conflict. So just a few more urban pups. Measuring them, so we do measure them, and then we put them back into the dens, and the parents will take them and usually move them to a different location. So that's your classic 4-week-old pup there, where the eyes are still a little blue, and they look really cute, and they're very easy to handle. Then that's a 5-week-old pup, and so now they're starting to develop their personalities, and so you'll get some that are shy and easy to handle, and then you'll get a few that aren't so easy, and that's when their teeth are starting to emerge. Another 5-week-old, and then 6 weeks is when they start to look like coyotes, and their eyes have changed, and they turn yellow. They're very characteristic yellow eyes of coyotes. So more pups. We'll talk about that in just a second. So currently, we're at a little over 1,240 coyotes that we've captured and marked so far. So it's been for coyote studies, that's a number that no one's anywhere close to that. So we're, I hate to keep saying that we're the first or the biggest, but I was thinking about this on the drive up. We probably don't say it enough. We're setting the stage and the bar really for other studies, and other studies are imitating us, so in a good way. So Minneapolis will be starting their own study this year, and they're following exactly what we set up. Madison has their study that's been going on for probably about 3 years now, and it's modeled after this. We've marked over 500 pups, and then we have caught a couple dogs, a couple humans. I don't think I've updated that. I don't know if you guys have caught any more dogs.
No.
You're right. So that's the biggest challenge. You're right. I was around with the 2 humans. So that was me,
Put a
unfortunately.
radio collar on him?
What's that?
Did you put a radio collar on him?
No, but they were interesting cases.
Was that McGraw?
No, but one of the dogs was in the group. And it wasn't one of Roy's dogs. It was actually a neighbor from the subdivision. But no, the people were in the forest preserves, and they were not supposed to be there. Right. So, let me see. So this is an aerial image of the Chicago area. And I just want to show you that this is that aerial image with all of these home ranges of our coyotes that we've monitored. This is for about 8 years of the study, so it's not the full study, but that's about 570 annual home ranges, which is a pretty amazing map. But I'm going to show you some of that in detail so you can kind of see how these coyotes move. But first, a little bit about their social system. So these coyotes, even though they are usually seen alone, they actually live in packs. They don't usually hunt together in packs, although they will occasionally, but they're usually alone or in pairs. And they do set up territories, that they defend these territories from other individuals. And the territory size here in the Chicago area is very small, so it's usually less than 2 square miles. But solitary animals that have left their home, their groups, have really large areas. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. So that's a map. That's the kind of stuff that we collect, and it costs a lot of money, a lot of man hours, a lot of satellite time. Those are GPS locations. So those are locations being recorded by a satellite of an alpha male. So this is the dominant male of a group that's living in Crabtree Forest Preserve, or at least they were at that time. So all of those little dots are his locations over a period of about a year. And the red dots are nighttime locations, and the yellow dots are daytime. And you'll see there's a lot more red ones because we schedule it that way, because they tend to be more active at night. But I want you to notice 2 things about that. One, you can really see the hard lines of a coyote territory. In fact, these coyotes literally, well, not literally, but they draw the boundaries of their territories for us. They're so hardwired that way. And you'll look at that and you'll say, well, that's probably caused by roads, because the roads are the ones that are causing that boundary, or that's what they're associated with. Well, what's happening is the coyote's using the roads to mark for the boundaries, but it's not restricted. The road isn't a barrier to the coyotes moving. The coyote can cross those roads anytime it wants. So it's not a physical barrier. It's just simply they're using a feature of the landscape to create a social barrier. In fact, this is no different than anywhere out in rural Illinois. It's just that they'll use different features like fence lines, trails, a river, a creek. In this case, they're using our roads. And they're doing the same things that we do. So when you buy your property, when you buy a house, what do? So you stake out what's your property line. Some of you probably have fences. So you're doing the same things that they do. So that's a territory, and he's defending that from other coyotes. So these are the same red dots. These are just his VHF locations. There's not as many, but I want you to notice. So again, you can see the roads, and if you go to the south, those yellow dots, that's the alpha male of an adjacent pack. If you go to the east, those blue dots are the alpha, locations of an alpha male to the east. And you can see that even though there's a few visits back and forth, coyotes will visit, they'll do it temporarily, but for the most part, they are creating nice, hard lines, and they're super organized in the way that they do this. And what's really interesting, long-term studies, including ours, have found that even if you were to remove the inhabitants of one of those territories, if you just totally remove them, they'll be replaced within a few days or weeks. And the replacements will take up the exact same territorial boundaries. In fact, you could remove all three of those, and there's a good chance that they will still, the new coyotes that will come in will actually create the same boundaries. That's in a forest preserve. These are guys that are living out in the matrix, what we call the matrix. So this is completely developed areas, and so they aren't using their home range continuously, so you don't see all those dots throughout their territories. You see clusters, and that's what they have to do when they're living among us. They're living in our neighborhoods. They have to use every little green space, and so they move through our neighborhoods quickly to get to cover or for hunting, and so that's what you're seeing. So that's what it looks like out in our neighborhoods. So this is just a big map of a bunch of territories for one year. And then the other thing I want to point out, a really important part of their population are solitary animals. So these are guys that have left their territories. They've left their family groups, usually young animals, and now they're floating around on the landscape looking for a vacancy. All those big yellow polygons, each one of those can be either male or female because they both leave, and they're just looking. They're just waiting for a vacancy. And if they can slide in, then they'll take over a spot. They're one of the biggest reasons why you can't get rid of coyotes permanently. So if we were to remove coyotes from McGraw, it would last just for a few days or a few weeks, and then you would have coyotes right back here again. Here's Poplar Creek. Every one of those red or colored clusters is a different pack. So that's 7 to 8 packs all in one forest preserve. So the resources here in Chicago are actually quite huge. We'll come back to Poplar Creek in just a little bit. So they defend these territories from other coyotes. They do this usually through howling and scent marking, primarily. If they have to, they will attack another coyote that's extremely rare. So they're actually very different from wolves. So when wolves, let's say northern Minnesota, if you don't hunt them, what they end up doing is you'll have a lot of conflict among wolves. In fact, wolves kill each other. In fact, that becomes the biggest cause of death for natural wolf populations. It's extremely rare for coyotes to do that. So one of the...
Why is that? Is there a reason for that?
Don't know why that is. Right? So it's a unique thing.
Yeah.
It may be a size thing because we also know that foxes, for example, also have territories. They also have the same kind of social system. They don't kill each other either. So it may be, and wolves are not unique about that. So the really big top predators, the big predators, they all kill each other. So bears are the biggest threat to bears. Mountain lions are the biggest threat to mountain lions. Right, so it's probably being the top dog. So one of the things about our research, I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but we had a PhD student out here working on coyote howling. And some of the things that she found, she actually played back tapes to our animals and watched their responses out in the wild, out in the forest preserves. And what she found was that they can count, so they'll know how many coyotes are howling in these howling bouts, and also that not all coyotes are equal. So not all howling bouts are started by any coyote. It's usually started by the alphas, and then the pups join in. There's some other things that we found, but this is what it looks like in the neighborhood. So for these coyotes to live among us, they have to be nocturnal for the most part, and they have to try and avoid us as much as possible. And so you can imagine what that's like every night. What a challenge it would be to move through your neighborhoods and try to not be seen every single night. So one of the things that we found early on is that a lot of people, if they don't realize that coyotes are in their neighborhoods, they're leaving food out inadvertently, like 5, 6, and 7's getting food. The cat is watching in the window, coyotes eating the food on the porch. And that goes on every night. So she was an interesting animal. So she did that all the time and never became a problem. She never became aggressive. We'll talk about that in just a second. In terms of the reproduction, so I mentioned a little bit about our mating. So first of all, coyotes can change their litter sizes dramatically based on resources. So it can be anywhere from 3 to 17 pups. What we've found is that they're monogamous, and I'll talk about that now. So as I mentioned earlier, we're the first study to actually genetically test their monogamy or their mating system. People that have done genetic tests of other monogamous species in the natural world, almost every single time find cheating going on. So almost every monogamous bird, most birds are behaviorally monogamous, but there's all kinds of cheating, with very few exceptions. In the mammalian world, monogamy, even behavioral monogamy, is really rare. Most of them they don't do that. But the ones that do always cheat. Foxes, for example, are the worst cheaters. Foxes are horrible, if you don't like cheating. But what we found, so this is a large study. So one of the PhD students, Ashley Worth, just finished a big block of the genetic work. And so from 2000 to 2016, so it's about 16 years, she's now genotyped, now we're up to 2018. Now she's over 800 animals genotyped, and I forget how many litters now where we're at, but at this point, we're about to submit the paper. 68 litters, over 300 pups, and what she found was that there's not a single case of cheating in 16 years across all of our pairs. And there's plenty of opportunities for them to cheat, so that's what's really funny. And the other thing is that not only do they not cheat within a season, but when they set up a bond, a mating bond, they stay together until one of them's dead. So you always hear the phrase, they stay together till life, or until one of them's dead. This is actually true for coyotes. And again, it's extremely rare in the mammalian world. So for example, that's a litter, that's a big hill litter, that's 11 pups. And in the old days, if you read the old accounts of coyotes by the old naturalists, they would go denning, which is digging up the dens and pulling the pups out. If they saw a litter that big, they assumed that it was more than two pairs, or more than two parents raising litters, because they didn't think that a single female could have that many pups. But we know, because we genetically test all of those, that those all came from a single female and a single male. The reason why coyotes can do that is because the male is just as attentive to parenting as the female. So the males are super good fathers, super good. She would not be able to raise litters that large if she didn't have his help. So if you compare that to, say, a raccoon, raccoons are just slightly smaller than coyotes, but what's the biggest litter size for a raccoon? How many young can a female raccoon have? So 6 is big. 6 is a big litter. Usually it's 4 to 5. That's the best they can do, and that's because she has no help. Bobcats are almost the same size as coyotes. A litter of 4 is a big litter for bobcat because she has no help. So coyotes can do that because they have help. That's one reason why their mating bond is so strong. And so when they stay together, for life. So for example, I said they could cheat. So we saw this image earlier. This is Poplar Creek. And every one of those colors, now you know what they represent. So that represents a pack. And you can see that they're really smashed in there. I mean, they're really tight. Well, we know that in the red, in that center part, that's a pair that were monogamous. So in every other of those groups, were monogamous. Well, the individuals in the middle, they could have mated with any of those others. They could have snuck over and mated, but they didn't. So they had at least 7 neighbors that they could have mated with, but they didn't. They had their own pack mates that are becoming older. They could have snuck off with one of their own pack mates, which would be super weird, but they could have done that. And then you have all those solitary animals. So I'm not showing you the solitary animals that are floating through, especially during the mating season, that are looking for those vacancies. Well, they're all sexually mature. So they could have mated with any of them, but they didn't. So they could have had all kinds of fun, but they stayed true just to their own mate. So anyway, one last little thing before I get off this subject. So this is coyote number 1. I always show pictures of this. So this is the first coyote of the study. So we caught her in March. So it would have been almost exactly 19 years ago. This is when we recaptured her 10 years later. So amazingly, she was the first animal that we caught. She's also the animal that lasted the longest. She set the record for all of her animals, still a record. She died in 2010, but we caught her as a subadult in 2000, so she was already a couple years old. So she was about 12 when she died. This is when we caught her as a 10-year-old, I believe. So we recaptured her. It was really hard. She had started to outlive the battery life of her collar, so we had to try and capture her again, which is super hard to do. She was super smart, but the reason why I'm pointing her out is because she had her mate, a guy that we affectionately called Melonhead, because he had a great big head. They got together in 2002, at least, and they had litters together every year after that until her death. And so they're an example of the monogamy. Again, doesn't just occur in a season. They were monogamous through their whole lives. So when they pick their mate, that may be the only individual they ever mate with in their life. So in the natural world, that's super, super rare. And we know nothing about how they do that selection. We don't have any idea. What?
Upon death, will they mate with another? I mean, the
Yes,
survivor.
right. So I won't go into all the details, but so she passed away actually from natural causes, which is also very rare for coyotes. She had a kidney issue that caused her to die. By the way, so she's not drugged there. That's why she's duct taped. I had to duct tape her mouth shut and carry her. That's why there's like that glove in her mouth and a lot of blood around there. This is her. That's actually her as we processed her. So that's an old female, but she's in great shape. She died. Then her mate, that's Melonhead right there. He did eventually. He left and actually hooked up with another coyote and had another. When we confirmed that they did have another litter, so they will take on another mate only after the death of that one. He hooked up with a younger coyote. So anyway, and you might be curious. So they live together. They had their territory for over a decade. For her, it was 12 years. This is where they live. So those are her locations. In the pink, and then the purple are his locations. That's the last year that they were together before she died. But that's where they lived for 10 years. That's Schaumburg area. So they live with people, just a few yards from people, every single day and night, and without a conflict, and raise a bunch of litters. In addition to those animals, I want to touch on this real quick, because this is another thing that's unique to our study. We actually have been able, in the last few years, through the hard work of Shane and others, we've been able to go into the downtown area, or at least what we call the urban core. So what you're looking at there, that's a road density map. So those are roads in the gray. And you can see as you move to your right, that's as you're getting downtown. So you can see that the roads are getting more dense and it's getting darker. And we thought that whatever we're finding out in the suburbs may not apply to the actual city. So we wanted to go into the city, or at least the heavily urbanized area, where no one has ever tried to do that for coyotes before, or any kind of predators. So we did, and so you can kind of see these different colors. Those colors are territories of urban animals. So that's the lakefront there, and you can see that they're still territorial, but the way that they use their territories, the interior part, now becomes very linear. So they're using a lot of the same travel lanes that we use. So this is 748 that Carrie was talking about, famous animal for us anyway, because he is an example of a pair that raised a litter right across from Soldier Field. So those are all his locations, again along Lakeshore Drive. And then this is where their litter was on top of a parking garage across the street from Soldier Field. So you'll see trees along there, and so you think, well, that's on the ground level. That's not. It's on an upper level and there's a gap. It's green architecture where they create a double layer and put soil in that in between the layers and then plant trees. What they're doing is actually providing habitat for coyotes by doing that. So they're able to raise a litter there. These are just more images of these downtowns. This is extremely hard to do. It's extremely hard to capture coyotes down there. And again, these different colors represent different packs, and I just want you to notice that they're extremely linear as you get in closer to the city. And then this is what it looks like. So I just want to show you a few images so you can get a feeling for what it's like to be an urban coyote. So this is at night, like almost all of them are down there, especially. And they'll use the same sidewalks and the streets that we use. They just have to do it when the traffic patterns are a little bit less. And let's see. I'm going to advance this a bit. So you'll see her crossing some streets. And I want you to notice a couple things. Oops. Shoot. I guess there won't.